And we are back with another episode of Book Club Fridays. And today I am going to review a few self-development and self-help books that I have read in the last year. Sounds kind of boring, right? Well, I promise you, the shit that I read is usually not boring. So, before we dive in, I just want to preface this by saying there's a good chance this is going to be a pretty short episode because I have really slowed down on my intake of self help and self development. Because through the years of 2021 and 2023, I nearly exhausted myself of the genre. I was in such a place of healing. That first couple of years of really deep, intense healing. And I found myself constantly reading book after book after book because I was in this raw and vulnerable place of wanting to heal myself, wanting to learn self awareness and emotional intelligence and understanding myself from such a deeper level. So I consumed multiple great, wonderful, knowledgeable books in the self help, self development genre in that time. But in 2024 and 2025, I really just haven't felt the call or haven't felt the need to really lean on that genre like I did before. And so I only have three books that we're going to talk about today. And even though I was so consumed with reading self development for a while, currently I have kind of switched up the game and have been listening to a lot more of those on audio. That really helped kind of renew my love for the genre. But like I said, I just haven't felt the need to. I'm always down to read a book that I feel pulled and called towards. But like I've said in previous episodes, it's a really intuitive thing for me. And so, fortunately enough, I've just felt like I've been in a place where I haven't needed to lean on them quite as hard. And if I do, or something does call to me, I typically have been listening to it on audio. So, let's get started. The first book that I want to talk about is actually a book that I did read. And that was because it was gifted to me by a friend. And it literally was the best book that I read last year. And especially for what I was going through and what I'm still currently going through with work and my creativity. And that book is The War of Art: Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles by Stephen Pressfield and Robert McKee. This book is only like 168 pages, so it really didn't take me long to read. And literally, as soon as I finished it, I gave it to my best friend. It was like, you have to read this. It will change your life, and we need to talk about it. So it was one of those books that I was just so impacted by when I read it that, again, I wanted to share it with somebody so I could talk about it. It was very easy to digest, which isn't always the case, I feel like, with self development and self help books. I have read some that literally make me feel kind of stupid because I'm like, all right, I don't know if I can conceptualize all of this, but I think I'm following. Or I would read them and a lot of it would feel like it would go over my head. But then there were like these little golden nuggets that would be like, okay, I get this. This is why I read this. This is what I'm going to hold on to. So if you are reading self development or self help and you're literally just like, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about, hold on to the pieces that resonate. Hold on to the golden nuggets. You don't have to understand every philosophical, process that they are trying to explain to you, especially in the beginnings of your healing journey. But The war of art centers around resistance and how, as creatives or people pursuing a purpose or trying to create something of impact, can truly become controlled by resistance without even realizing it. Yes, like procrastination or stagnation or self doubt. We know some of these ways in which resistance presents itself really obviously. But this book really broke down what resistance truly is and then even further explained it in different scenarios about how it can sneak into our world and into our life without us really recognizing it or noticing it. And that I think was the most impactful because there were parts in this book where I would read, it was like broke down into segments versus chapters. And I really liked that. But I would read these pages or these segments and I would be like, holy shit, like that is happening to me. I am feeling that. I am allowing resistance to win. And resistance can make us feel trapped. And it isn't until we recognize it fully that we can actually do something about it. So, this book, just piece by piece, really allowed me to be able to see the resistance in my life, how it was playing a factor, what it was preventing me from pursuing. And I did it in a way that I was able to not shame myself for it, but really just acknowledge it. The way this book is written is very like no nonsense, straight to the point. And I also liked that because it literally called me out on my shit. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. And to really understand how we're getting in our own way. I gave this book a 5-star rating and have promised myself that I will read it literally every year until I die because I think it just had so many beautiful reminders of pursuing your purpose and the fact that we are here for a reason. And resistance is going to meet us many times over and over again, especially if we are getting really close to what we're meant to be pursuing. It's like the closer you get to it, the stronger the resistance builds. But we have to choose to have faith that's bigger than our fear. And yeah, this book was just a really beautiful inspiration of that. But like I said, in a very no nonsense delivery, which I appreciate. And it helped me to just push through creative blocks and still does. Like I can reference back to it and it'll still give me those reminders. So, yeah, it's a great one. Go check it out, especially if you are a creative, especially if you feel like resistance is really got its claws sink into you. All right, on to the next book, which is one that I listen to on audio. And I listen to all my audiobooks on Spotify. If you pay for Spotify Premium, you get 15 hours of free audiobooks a month. So you're welcome if you did not know that, because when I found out, I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. So, Spotify Premium users, 15 hours a month, free audiobooks. But keep track of your hours because nothing sucks more than getting to the end of your monthly hours and being halfway through a book that you really like. So, pay attention, but it is a really good resource and just a really good deal. I mean, who doesn't love a good deal? So, this book was Signs, The Secret Language of the Universe by Laura Lynn Jackson. And Laura Lynn Jackson is a psychic medium. See? What did I tell you? The shit that I read is pretty interesting. Now, I am someone who absolutely believes in signs from the universe, God, our loved ones on the other side. Some may call it heaven, some may call it the other side. And in this book, that's what she references it as, is the other side. But I believe if you ask and you're open, that the signs will come, because that's the thing. We can ask for signs, but if we are in doubt or we don't believe, then it's really hard for those signs to come through. So it's really important for us when we do ask to be open to it, to be willing to see it, and to want to believe in something bigger than this life here on this earth. And so, as a psychic medium, Laura really spends a lot of time connecting with people on the other side that connects her to people here on earth. And in this book, she shares story after story from her experiences of connecting people with their loved ones who have passed. And it's heartbreaking and it's beautiful, but it's also deeply comforting because the ways in which she uses her spiritual gift to really bring peace to people who have lost ones that they've loved is just a really magical thing. Because if you've ever lost someone, if you've ever experienced grief, you know and understand the helplessness or the loneliness or the heartache that comes with that loss. And it's just very validating because, yeah, we can think, oh, that's just a coincidence. But what does believing that, oh, it's just a coincidence give us? Whereas if we can choose to believe in the signs of the universe, it gives us hope and it gives us faith and it gives us connections. And I know this and have learned this firsthand in my life because since I was 18, I've unfortunately experienced a lot of tragic death in my life. And that does come with very different forms of grief in many different ways. And so when I was 18 years old, I lost a childhood best friend in a tragic car accident. And that was my first experience with death. It was very obviously, as a car accident, unexpected, but it really was the beginning of me questioning life because I was so young and I just didn't know how to process. I didn't know how to grieve, and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with all of these feelings that I was feeling. But since then, which it's now been almost 15 years ago, usually at least once a year, sometimes they happened more, but usually at least once a year, I would have a dream about my friend that I lost. Very, very vivid dreams. And in these dreams, it'd be different locations or scenarios, but the concept was always the same. And he would just kind of like walk back into life, present day, and be like, hey guys, I'm back. And, we would all be very curious and confused. And where have you been? Or why are you still the same age that you were when you passed? And all of these like really big questions. Like I said, these have happened multiple times over the years, but just like in different ways in different places. But it's always that same idea. And I never really allowed myself to put much thought into it until now, especially the last couple years where I have become more in tune with my intuition and I've understood what spirituality can mean in such vast ways, specifically in my life, but just for all of us in general. And so now, looking back on these dreams, I really feel like it was this message from him telling me that even though his physical body never aged past a teenager, his spirit is still evolving with us. No matter where we are in this life, no matter how many years go by, his presence is still very much there. And that brought me comfort. That gave me a sense of peace. And it's really special when you can lean into those feelings instead of, the sadness and the heartache of them just being gone. And a couple summers ago, I also lost a cousin very tragically, very suddenly. And when we first found out that she was being taken to the hospital because she collapsed, we really weren't sure what was going on. We didn't have a whole lot of answers, or like thought she maybe was just dehydrated. And I was at my parents' at the time when we had gotten the news. And so the girls and I decided to spend the night there while they went to go and be with my aunt and uncle at the hospital. So I'm getting updates like all through the night. My girls went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. So I had stayed awake. And the longer the night progressed into morning, I just was filled with this very deep sense of sadness. And I just kind of knew that something really unfortunate was coming. And so, not sleeping at all throughout that night, I went outside and sat on the swing in the front yard. A friend of mine, it's like 6 a.m. The birds are chirping, the sun's just coming up. I have been up all night, and I was holding on to a warm cup of coffee, just trying to calm my nerves. And my friend had stopped by. One of my closest friends had stopped by and was sitting with me on that swing. And I hadn't gotten an update in a little while. It had just been kind of like, we're still running tests. They're still trying to figure out what's going on and things like that. And I was looking out across the way into some evergreen trees. And right in the middle of all of these really big, beautiful, deep green evergreens was a bright red cardinal. And it was like in that moment, even though I didn't have confirmation, I knew that she was gone. But I also knew that she was sending me a message that she was still there. You know, she was going to be okay. Now, in that moment, I may have felt comforted by seeing that bird. But over the next week, I really struggled with acceptance. It was probably a passing that I felt the most physically out of anyone that I've loved, that I have lost. And it truly felt like somebody was ripping something outside of my chest, just like breaking open my ribs. And I know that sounds probably very strange, but again, as an empath, as someone who has experienced grief in many different ways and many different seasons of life, I just had a very physical response to her passing. And as I was walking through the yard a few days later, after we had gotten confirmation that she was not going to wake up, I was like screaming at the clouds. I was screaming and I was crying and I was just so upset and I was so heartbroken. And I just remember calling out her name and asking her, please tell me you're still here. Please send me a sign. And mind you, this is before I read or listened to this book. But I was walking through the grass barefoot and I looked down and there was this beautiful gray feather just laying right at my feet. I still have it. It's sitting up on my bookshelf. And I picked up that feather and it was just like this blanket of warmth that washed over me. That again, I knew she was telling me that even though she had physically left this earth, that her spirit was still very much connected to mine. And her cord of light, the love that we shared, the energy there, never will die. And yeah, it's still hard. It's still tragic. It's still something that can bring you to your knees and make you cry or make you scream or make your stomach physically just like ill with this helplessness. But it's also a reminder that when we do leave this earth, I truly believe that we just simply change shape. I got another little reminder a couple weeks ago, I had an aunt who passed away from cancer. And I'd gotten ready for her funeral, and I was looking out my bedroom window, and a blue jay was sitting right there, just like looking at me. And once again, it was just like this beautiful little reminder that, hey, I'm at peace. I am still here, not in the same ways that I was, but I felt it in my bones that that love will always exist. That love will always be there. And over the next day afterwards, Macy and I both just kept seeing blue jays everywhere. And yeah, could that be a coincidence? Sure, maybe. Or it could be a sign of connection. And so this book just affirmed all of those things for me. This book really allowed me to hear stories from other people who have also experienced great loss but found great connection with those loved ones on the other side. And I highly recommend to anybody who is navigating grief, because it's hard and it's confusing and it is ever evolving, to maybe check it out. Because when we can believe in something greater than us, when we can have faith in the other side and our connection to it, it will truly show up and show us how close it is. And I gave this book a 4.25 star. There was a lot of conversations of parents who lost children, and that was really hard and emotional for me to get through. And so I think that that impacted my reading a little bit. But all in all, it was a really beautiful book, and it really affirmed a lot for me, especially in such a hard thing to navigate, such as grief. So be open, allow yourself to see the signs, because I promise you that they're there. All right, on a lighter note, the last book I'm going to talk to you about is Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Ewinga. No, I didn't say that right. Yun. I can't say it. I tried. Okay, I even looked it up to hear how to pronounce it. Youngjin? Something like that. Okay, I apologize, Joseph. I really tried. But, anyways, he wrote this book. I also listened to it on Spotify. It is only 126 pages, so you can get through it really quick. But what I really enjoyed about this book was that it felt like a refresher course of so much of the healing work that I had done in regards to my mental health. And so, if you've done healing work or you're just starting to unpack your own patterns, this book kind of wraps it all up in a neat little package. It's very simple, but it was also very powerful. And the one lesson that really stood out for me was understanding the difference between our thoughts and our thinking. And so, for example, I have a thought, I want to be a podcaster. That is your spirit talking. But when your thinking kicks in, who do you think you are? Do you have time to do something like that? What are people going to think? Is anybody actually going to listen? It's going to be expensive. All of these doubts, that come in, those are the thinking mind. So, you can kind of see the difference. But that shift was really interesting because obviously I knew that. I know that. But it just kind of compartmentalized that for me in a way that I was like, okay, yes, I can see this much more clearly. And I even had the thought while I was listening to it that I was like, this would be a good book for teenagers to listen to. Because again, it's really easily digestible. It was really well written, broken down very well, but also a really, really valuable tool because it can get confusing especially when you're young, to differentiate what it is that is true for you or what is your fear talking. And so I feel like this book could really help people untangle that and understand those patterns. So, very helpful read. I gave it a 4-star. All right. So before we end, I am going to talk about a couple books that just didn't match the hype for me. Again, just for conversation, because why not? The first was The Alchemist. And it kind of made me sad because this book has been hyped up so much online, especially in the spirituality world, especially in the self-help world. But I did think it was good. Don't get me wrong. But I think I was just a little late to the game. I think if this would have been one of the books that I would have read 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it may have hit a little harder for me. But I feel like it just wasn't as impactful because I have already learned so many lessons that I've come so far in my journey that it just didn't really feel as profound. But it's a parable about a boy, and it's told from like the fiction sense, but in a way to inspire you and allow you to understand, following your destiny is really the whole point of this life. And the philosophy is beautiful and the way the story is told is beautiful. But like I said, just the concept itself, I think I was just a little too late to the game. I think this could have been a little bit more impactful for me a handful of years ago when I first started my journey. But like I said, I just couldn't get super invested. I still enjoyed it. Didn't match the hype. Another one, which makes me super sad because I absolutely loved The Untethered Soul, but I listened to The Surrender Experiment a couple of months ago, and they're both by the same author, Michael A. Singer. And like I said, The Untethered Soul, incredible book, absolutely incredible. I probably should go back and read it or like listen to it. But The Surrender Experiment, I felt drawn to because surrender has been a huge theme for me this year. But even though I felt really drawn in the beginning, once the story continued, it just really felt like it was a catalog of the author's achievements and successes, not in like an egotistical way, but just kind of like, and this happened, and that's how I surrendered to life, and this happened, and that's how I surrendered to life. Because then, even when there was like an entire downfall of his business and corporation, it was still like all about the surrendering to it. But I just felt kind of bored by the story in the middle. Like, yes, I understood that he was like explaining how he surrendered to life and how that was like the experiment of, 30 years for him. But I just was kind of like, okay, cool. You did this. Cool. You did this. So it just wasn't my favorite. And hearing about all the logistics of him building his businesses that turned into a corporation just really didn't do it for me. Like I said, understood the concept, loved the beginning where he like talked about explaining what it meant to surrender and why you should instead of forcing life and trying to learn to flow with it. But yeah, I just wasn't a huge fan, wasn't as impactful as The Untethered Soul by any means. So, all right, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up. If you have read any of these, come hang out in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you've got a fave self-help or spiritual book, send it my way. Because even though I might not be reading many of them, I'm still happy to add it to my TBR. Please like, comment, follow, and subscribe. Leave a rate and review if you feel called. And come say hey on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Turn the Page Podcast. All right, until next time.